Hi there, Brad. This is new to me, so I'm gonna try to look at the camera and not look at the screen. I want to talk about something that happened to me a day when I was feeling uncertainty and anxiety. It was a day that I flew from Cincinnati to Istanbul and then to Nairobi, Kenya. I arrived there at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I had prepared for my trip to Kenya, and I had read a lot, and I knew all sorts of things to watch out for, and I was prepared for many different things to happen. And I wasn't afraid, but I had felt some anxiety about my arrival because I arrived at Nairobi airport alone at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I had made reservations and made arrangements with the Mennonite guest house to have someone come to the airport and pick me up and take me to the guest house where I would stay for a couple of days before I traveled farther west. But I just had a feeling that day it just didn't feel quite right. I felt some anxiety around it. I thought it was just because it was 2 o'clock in the morning in a big city in a developing nation, which is enough. But sure enough, I got off the plane and I made my way through customs, and a young man leaped out of nowhere. I'm not sure where he was, but he convinced me that I needed him to push this cart for me that had my 3 bags, and it was heavy. I really didn't mind the help. And then I tipped him, and I could tell right away that I had been naive tourist and that I had tipped far too much. But and at that point, I remembered being warned not to let people convince me to use their services. Anyway, I told him, "Thank you very much. I'll take the cart from here." So I pushed my heavy cart over toward the area where there was a line, a throng of people waiting to meet people who were coming off the plane. There was a barrier that kept them over on one side of the barrier and the arriving passengers on this side. And they were, I could see a lot of them were yelling, "Taxi, taxi," so I knew some of them were taxi drivers. I looked for a driver who might be holding up a card with my name on it, Hayden, and there was no card with my name on it. There was no one there to meet me at 2 o'clock in the morning in Nairobi. And I had a moment of, maybe I should say, panic. But about that time, I looked up, and this large black woman, very nicely dressed, came in from the outside, came up through part of the ways to all the drivers who were standing there. There was a man following her, and it was very clear she was in charge, and she said to him, "There they are, and make sure they don't tip anyone. Bring them over here and make sure they don't tip anyone." And I thought, okay, maybe I need to talk to this woman. And the group that she was pointing at, I had talked with some of them on the airplane, and I knew that they were a group of American missionaries who were coming to Nairobi to take some classes or do something. I wasn't sure what, actually. But so I made my way over to this woman and explained my situation and told her that I was looking for someone from the Mennonite guest house. But I also realized that I had not printed out the email that had the Mennonite guest house phone number on it. Besides that, my cell phone wouldn't have worked there anyway, and I didn't know how else to find another phone. And so I asked her if she would mind if she could get the number for the Mennonite guest house and call for me. And it turns out she had the number because she dealt with them fairly often. So this was looking better. She walked with me up and down this line of people. She was scanning the crowd looking for someone that she recognized from the Mennonite guest house and found no one there. So she went back and called the office, but it was by now 2:30-ish in the morning, and there was no answer. So I was trying to think, oh, all right, what shall I do? And before I could get very far with thinking like that, she said, we will take you to the guest house. We're going to another guest house not too far away from there. We will take you there to the Mennonite guest house. And so I was in no position to be proud and say, no, no, please don't do that. I said, oh, thank you very much. That would be wonderful if you could do that, if you're sure it's not too far out of the way. And so I went with this group of American teachers out to sort of a large van. We were pretty crowded, and there was a tower of their luggage strapped onto the top, and my 3 bags, 2 of them filled with things I was taking to a hospital in western Kenya, were stacked on top of the other bags. And we got in, crowded into this van, and went bumping across the streets of Nairobi at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock by now, 3 o'clock. It was very dark. They didn't have many street lights. The roads were really rough. There were people about who didn't look like people that I particularly would want to meet in a dark alley, but then I was pretty skittish by then. So we finally arrived at my guest house at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and managed to wake up the night porter. He was quite baffled, but talking to this woman who he knew and she knew him, and she convinced him to let me into the guest house compound, and he took me to an empty room. It turns out when I made the arrangements, I should have used the 24-hour clock, because what I said was that I'd be arriving at 2 a.m. at the Nairobi airport on a certain date. And whoever took the message wrote down 2 but didn't put the a.m. So they assumed it was 2 p.m. that day. And that's when they had scheduled someone to come pick me up. Before I left the people on the van, I found out the woman's name was Esther Hall, and she was an American who had moved to Nairobi several years ago, and her job was to coordinate groups of missionaries who come to Kenya on different tasks and missions. And so she was the perfect person for me to meet at 2 o'clock in the morning at the Nairobi airport. She was just exactly the person that I needed. I offered to pay them for their time and gas, and she wouldn't hear of it. She said, no, this is what Christians do. So I had felt very vulnerable when I arrived in the Nairobi airport that morning, very vulnerable, very alone. And at the end of the experience, I felt very accompanied and not alone. And it was the first of several times when I happened to meet just the right person, just the person I needed to meet at just the time I needed to meet them, so that I always felt a sense of a higher presence that was with me, and it was very affirming.